The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well. And you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month. And you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift. So if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on the lands of the Lenape people, also known as New York City. Yeah, research that. Thank you, ChatGTP. October, no doubt, I think once again was a whirlwind in politics. Prime Minister Albanese met with President Trump in Washington intentionally in conjunction with the 2025 Dunn Street United States engagement mission, and I thought that was good that the Prime Minister planned it around that, securing a multi-billion-dollar minerals deal and reinforcing Australia's role in the Indo-Pacific region. Back home, millions struggled through the Optus outage, whilst here in New York City, Zohran Mamdani is running a grassroots campaign connecting directly with voters on affordability and is now the hot favourite to win the New York City mayoral election, which happens next Tuesday. To help me unpack this, plus our usual episode categories, I'm joined by the former ALP campaign director and now a doctor in the Puritan Wars, Dr. David Feeney. Welcome back to Socially Democratic. It's been too long.
Thank you. That's the Punic Wars. The Puritans came a little bit later.
And former Deputy Chief of Staff to Premier Daniel Andrews and Managing Partner at FMRS Advisory and sitting in the Dunn Street recording studios by the looks of it.
Well,
Jessie McCrone.
You
welcome
leave the
back.
house and I take land. Like that's how it works. This is no longer your office.
Yep, adverse possession.
You snooze, you lose. So let's.
The lighting's
let's
also
start.
better here. Just quietly.
Wonderful.
Grace, take as many photos of me at this angle as you can because it's much better than downstairs in the darkened dining room.
I also should note that I'm battling a cough at the moment. I've a week on the road in DC and New York is starting to catch up to me. So forgive me if I drop some coughs every now and then. Okay, let's get into the first thing, which was Albanese finally got his meeting with President Trump. It was a big moment on the international stage for our Prime Minister. And as you expect, there's lots to unpack from that engagement with a major policy win for Australia. First of all, though, let's sort of zoom out. Albanese walked into this meeting and came out with some real wins. It's a high-risk environment walking into the Oval Office as a head of state or as a prime minister, having to step over the carcasses of past heads of state that had less success in that engagement with President Trump. You probably couldn't have had a better meeting for Prime Minister Albanese, Jessie.
No, it was phenomenal. Like I think David and I are on the record as saying that the best thing that happens for Albo is to not meet the president, and he showed us up because I think it went incredibly well. Not only did we get some concrete outcomes, the president very happy with our prime minister, we also got the comedic run that followed it in the interaction with former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Some of us enjoyed it more than others. But I think it was an extreme success. Not only did there's been a lot of coverage of the critical minerals of some of the other parts of the discussion. I think the part that isn't getting as much coverage was the discussion around the Australian super funds and investment in America. And I think that is an extraordinary sort of milestone and achievement to have Donald Trump talk about that. and the welcome investment from Australian super funds into the American economy. And I think that we as a country haven't really unpacked that and what it means for the retirement of many working Australians. But it was really positive.
David, I'll get your broader reflections as well, but obviously this $8.5 billion critical minerals deal, a massive thing for the Australian industry and supply chains and jobs. How significant is this for Labor's agenda going forward?
Yeah, well, I think the meeting overall was just an absolute disaster for News Corporation and the coalition because they had overhyped it week on week, month on month. You know, why can't the Prime Minister get a meeting with the President? This is really important and Albo's not doing it. So they made sure that every Australian was watching a meeting that normally would have passed with only nominal interest. And that News Corp sort of prepared the ground so that every journalist had to write about it, irrespective of how interesting it was. And so they had firmly fixed the spotlight of Australia on this meeting, and then, God damn it, the meeting went well. I can only imagine the sounds of hair being torn out of the scalps of News Corp editors and journalists when things started to unfold well. So, yes, the meeting had an unprecedented degree of attention and analysis going into it. And then all of the pundits were desperately disappointed about the fact the meeting went really, really well. And it's very, very interesting that Trump obviously made the decision and the assessment that Australia was in the category to be charmed rather than kicked. The great supposed vulnerability that Australia has in its defence spending was not a weakness. In fact, Trump said, countries do what they can, and I respect that. Something to that effect. And the meeting was warm and the interactions between the two of them were very warm. And to the extent that Trump was aware that his name played at all in our last federal election here in Australia, he either didn't care or was oblivious to it. And you'll recall at one point after Trump said some glowing things about Prime Minister Albanese, Albo said, well, I'll use that in my next campaign ad. So the relationship between the two of them appeared to be very, very, very good, and that's excellent. Unless you're a News Corp editor, then it's a goddamn catastrophe.
Or Susan Ley.
Or Suzanne, who obviously Suzanne was hoping for a misstep as well. So a good moment for Australian diplomacy. And while I'm giving a plug to Australian diplomacy, you might remember in a previous episode I winced at Australia's failure to secure a deal with Papua New Guinea. That deal has since been done. So we now have a treaty ally in Papua New Guinea. That's important little success that's finally been landed by the Albanese government as well. But back to the main yarn. So, yes, the meeting was really very, very successful. As for the rare earths deal, both, they wanted to have an announceable. Trump likes to show that he's signing big resource deals and bringing jobs and money to the United States. Tick, tick, tick for him, tick, tick, tick for Albo. But this has got, real meaning for Australian industry. This is a sector that, because of China's sort of predatory and ruthless behaviour in this market, driving others out of it, there's now a sort of a global spotlight on rare earths, and that's good for Australia and good for Australian jobs. So that means that Albo walked away with something tangible and hopeful for our economy. All good.
Jessie?
No, I do think it is interesting that no matter what big issue is happening, whether the government has provided it or whether circumstance has, how terribly the Liberals are handling any big issue right now. And I think the meeting with Trump is such a good example that Susan entirely overplayed her hand, and the whole discussion about whether Kevin Rudd should still be the ambassador was fundamentally not in with keeping with anyone who actually watched the footage. Like, Trump was clearly having a joke when he had a crack at our former Prime Minister. Susan Ley clearly didn't understand it was a joke, but some of her backbenchers did. And I think it just sort of speaks to how terribly divided they are, that even a meeting with Trump couldn't have them just sort of note it and move on. We had backbenchers coming out and sort of backing Kevin Rudd from the opposition, saying that he was doing a good job. Like, it's just it's a terrible outcome for Susan Ley, and it does not seem that she can catch a break, whether it's the climate wars, whether it's a meeting with Trump. It does not seem to matter what the topic is. The Liberal Party wants to tear itself apart about it.
Wouldn't have
It's a
happened if
win-win-win
Barnaby was in charge.
Well, I will say, I do
Rudd-
think Jane Hume is doing a phenomenal job right now of undermining the leadership with some really nice, pithy little lines. She was asked on radio whether she would consider joining the Nats, and she said, "I do look fetching in an Akubra. However, I'd have to speak slower and talk about the regions more often. But no, to be honest, I'm too fond of good coffee and free markets to become a national." And I just, yeah, she's being sassy and I like it is. It's Jane at her best, frankly, and I'm here for it. Sorry, David.
No, that was definitely an interjection worth having. I thought the Kevin Rudd stuff was funny. I mean, as a matter of principle, the point of ambassadors is you don't want someone who's close to the country you're visiting, although that's nice. You want someone who's close to the leader of the country they're representing, so that the ambassador can deliver real results back home following engagement. And so, love him or hate him, Kevin Rudd is someone who can get Albo on the phone and have the highest level interactions with the Australian government. Choosing someone who Trump really likes is not actually the point, because it's got to be someone that the government has confidence in. So, for instance, one of the things that was discussed was Trump finally and belatedly appointing an ambassador from America to Australia. The position has been vacant since Trump came to office. Well, of course, when Trump chooses an ambassador, we want him to select someone who will have his ear. It doesn't matter if they come over here and have Albo's ear, if they have no cachet back in Washington. So that means, while we all might have our wish list of celebrities and Democrats and celebrity Democrats who he might choose for the post, what is actually going to happen, we hope, is that he chooses someone close to him, because that ambassador will then have clout here in Australia. And so, the reverse is true. Now, watching Kevin get fanged by Donald Trump was obviously very, very painful for a lot of people. You can imagine how I reacted on seeing that. But
straight to his defence.
Straight to his. But I'm sure because Kevin Rudd is the type of gentleman who prioritises the people of Australia and his mission to the United States, I'm sure he went back to his office and had a deep, hard think about whether he is indeed the right person for the job, and we'll leave him to those deliberations. But the real story here is not that Kevin Rudd is an enemy of Donald Trump's, because I just don't think he is. Donald Trump has got bigger fish to fry than worrying about the Australian ambassador. But he is definitely the enemy of News Corporation, isn't he? And so News Corp are going to run this diversionary vendetta against Kevin Rudd forever. And I guess what we all need to remember is that's of no account. And the point of the story is simply that Albo and Trump have now established their relationship for all to see, including News Corp, and all News Corp is left with is trying to kick sand in the face of Australia's ambassador in Washington.
Let's get Grace. For those of you listening to the show but didn't follow what happened in the actual meeting, Sky News journalist Andrew Clennell, I think it's pronounced, asked President Trump a question about the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Let's have a listen to the clip.
Been concerned in Australia that it's taken 9 months to get this meeting. Have you had any concerns with this administration, with its stance on Palestine, climate change, or even things the ambassador said about you in the past, the Australian ambassador?
I don't know anything about him. I mean, if he said bad, then maybe he'll like to apologize. I really don't know. Did an ambassador say something bad about him? Don't tell me. I don't. Where is he? Is he still working for you?
Yeah.
You said bad?
Before I took this position, Mr. President.
I don't like you either. I don't, and I probably never will.
I would also like to know what the Venn diagram of listeners that haven't seen this but are also listening to your podcast is.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so there we go. The thing that I took away from it initially that concerned me, and I think my fears were allayed slightly after sort of more of the reporting from behind the scenes. But in the moment, given the high stakes situation that White House Oval Office can be when President Trump meets leaders from other countries, it was nice to see Sky News play Jeopardy with billions of Australian dollars and Australian businesses and workers so they could have their headline to put one up a former PM that they, as you just pointed out to David, they clearly hate. Like, I just thought at the time, good on you, Andrew. Good on you for really putting, the interests of Australia ahead of your own personal vendetta because you got the shits with Kevin Rudd.
They're not the nationalist outfit, Stephen. Their job is to hold truth to power and fearlessly report. It's not to help Australia and Australians. You've just misconceived their mission. I thought bringing Kevin Rudd along to the meeting might, on first glance, have appeared to have been a high-risk strategy by our Prime Minister, but actually was an act of genius. Because protocol dictates that our Prime Minister couldn't go to that meeting wearing a flak jacket, he instead brought somebody who could take all the bullets for him. His very own crash test dummy, wasn't it? And so he knew if things got tough in that meeting, he was just going to pop
human shield.
He had his own little human shield. And he was going, here, you deal with Kevin while I make my getaway.
I thought Kevin handled it quite well, actually, given, we've seen Kevin in other situations where things haven't gone according to plan, where he's got a little bit stroppy. The Batuta Advocate had an absolute funny post during the week. It was called Kevin 27. Rudd immediately gets to work mapping out vengeful plot to topple smart mouth president.
Yeah. Lucky for Trump, Kevin's not a hater.
He's never been known to. It'd be very out of character.
It would. Yeah,
I thought
he's a Zen kind of guy.
And the other thing is,
let bygones be bygones.
Trump handled it very well. He laughed it off. Like, I actually thought I don't know if I read this or the reporting was afterwards when they were back when they sort of went off the cameras. It was all quite cordial and quite funny and almost quite pally. So bizarre. Anyway. Any other takeaways from
Dunn? Was left with, isn't it? Like, the meeting went well, the relationship was great. The meeting had, all the warm, buzzy stuff, but also questions of substance. All News Corp was left with was one barb to chuck at a former Prime Minister. Like, get me.
The other news to happen during the month was this Optus outage, a nationwide failure on October 7th, 12 plus hours of blackout hitting O hospitals, transport and small business. So it was a bit of a telecommunications catastrophe. Jessie, to you, this was sort of the first big test for Minister Anika Wells in her new portfolio after she was the aged care minister in the previous term and crushed it. How did Minister Wells handle this particular crisis?
I think she handled it in the way that any minister who is the regulator of this sector should. She demanded answers, she demanded accountability, and she looked for ways to make the system better. She fast-tracked some legislation that allowed for greater regulation on the industry, and she called all the telcos into her office to sort of say, okay, this has happened to Optus. How are we making sure this isn't happening at the other places as well? I think the thing that the Liberals didn't do well is they underestimated her. I think this is a piece of advice I give to any Labor staffer who has anything to do with question time tactics, if you are going to determine that you are going to put a minister on the rack and spend every question asking them about their issue, you have to keep it up for the whole week. Because if you put a minister, which is what the Liberals tried to do to Anika Wells, they asked her 20 questions, so the first 2 days were all to her. They felt like they were building to something, and it turned out they really had nothing, and they could not sustain it for the last day of question time. And I think all it signals is weakness on the behalf of the opposition. It has arguably given Anika a bit of an authority pump. Like if there's any question about whether she can handle herself in challenging question time, she smashed it. And I think that the opposition, again, any advice to any Labor staffer listening, if you are going to try and put a government on the rack, you have to have a week's worth of questions. You have to make sure every single one goes, and you have to have a narrative arc about what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to building. Like, as you would know, David, probably better than Stephen and I, like question time is often a very psychological game. And I do feel they failed catastrophically on getting into Anika's head. So in terms of her management of the issue, I think that she has done all the things she needs to do. I think she has expressed how frustrated she is with the circumstance. I think the opposition have got themselves in a dicey territory where they were looking a little bit like they were prepared to ignore Optus's failings just to focus on the minister, and I don't know that the public necessarily would have come with them on that. So I think that while you wouldn't wish a circumstance like this on any minister, I think she handled it really well.
In terms of corporate accountability, where do we rank the telco's response to this as an issue?
I think David has views.
Yeah, I think Jessie has sugarcoated that, and that's nice.
I've never been accused of sugarcoating anything in my entire life.
Well, then let today be the first. I think Anika's performance here was strained and uncertain. And you'll recall there were two particular moments at the outset of this crisis where Anika at a press conference said in response to a tough question from a journalist, well, that's a question you should put to the Optus CEO, which was a sort of a deflection at a moment when she needed to be seen to be in charge. But I think more dangerously, in response to another question, she said, I'm still a new minister to the industry, so I would say I'm listening to everybody at the moment.
She was asked explicitly who she's talking to in the industry about this.
I guess
I acknowledge the soundbite wasn't great, but like the question is important in listening to the answer.
Now, I mean, and that let the Liberals say, well, this is a minister with her training wheels on and she doesn't feel confident in the job to deal with this crisis. So that was all a bit uneven. I think the nature of the crisis was such that it was everybody versus Optus. And so I don't think Anika ever was really under any – I don't think there's any lasting damage. I don't think that she was the villain in the piece was always going to be Optus. It wasn't going to be Optus and the government.
No, but I think that's where the Liberals have made a calculated error there. I think they've seen that soundbite that you just discussed and entirely overplayed their hand.
Well, I don't feel like they played a hand. I feel like the Liberals sort of tried to capitalise and embarrass the minister, but didn't have the discipline to stick with that line of questioning and wandered off the field.
Or evidence. Like they didn't actually have anything they could point to.
No, but I don't think. I mean, I'm not putting this any more strongly than to say it wasn't Anika's finest moment, and the Prime Minister and others backed her up, and the crisis continued to unfold in the way it did, and the only lasting impression the electorate will have of this moment is, the Optus CEO being monstrously out of his depth and under enormous pressure, and the company's reputational damage. I don't think the government has lost any skin over it, but could we have handled this better? Well, yeah, I think we probably could have.
But I mean, isn't it
We didn't need to
interesting?
be watching that charge against Optus. We probably needed to be seen to be leading it.
But to your, I mean, this is. I mean, I'm no expert on this sort of stuff, but this is when government has to be reactionary, not proactive, because it was something that landed on their plate because of the negligence of a private telecommunications company, and all we can really expect of the minister is to assess.
So we're not bystanders, Stephen. We're regulators.
No, yeah, true, but I mean, and that's what she's done. She sought to then try and address it and fix it in ways that doesn't apply just to Optus, but to all of them. I thought calling in all the telcos and saying, well, we have to work together on this one to make sure this never happens again.
Yeah, frankly, like aside from an unfortunate soundbite, I genuinely don't think that the handling of it was. I don't agree with your assessment that she shouldn't say that these are questions for Optus to answer, because she doesn't say that. They become questions for the government, and frankly, Optus wasn't even telling the government what was going on. Like, how can she give answers with that certainty, given it became very clear that Optus wasn't providing them with...
The gallery certainly formed a view about it. The ABC's coverage on one night finished with the line, ministerial responsibility involves many things, but a perception of competence is near the top. Like, they were hard on her.
Yeah, they were hard on her. And I think that, and that's my point about how I think that week in Parliament, she demonstrated her capacity to deal with that.
Okay.
But I think that they were overly hard on her, partly because the government hasn't had a lot of targets.
You're giving her 10 out of 10. I'm giving her 6 out of 10.
I'd like to argue at least you up to a 7. I think you are being unnecessarily unfair. I think the media coverage lent itself to the Liberals, and I'm not sure if you watched Question Time that week, but the Liberals really did hang their whole week when there were challenges around ISIS brides and when they had challenges around what's his name? Your mate, Hastie, leaving and not prosecuting the ISIS bride. Like, what I thought would play out that week for the Liberals is Hastie has resigned his post. Susan Ley has made a point in her statement to say it is disappointing that he has done this on the day that the government has allowed ISIS brides into the country. I thought that the strategic play for her, not only from an internal perspective, from an external perspective, was to really prosecute that argument and demonstrate she could do it and Hastie wasn't. Instead, they overplayed their hand, I think, on Optus and spent their time focusing on Anika. It is a strategy that they have tried. They tried it with Sam Ray the week before. They tried it with Daniel Molino, where they gave them 10 questions in a row. I think that my general advice to anyone is if you're going to try and put someone on the rack, you have to keep them on the rack. I also think right. Anika came out of that week with a fair bit of pressure on her and a fair bit of expectation about, you've been outstanding for the government, you've been a good communicator, what are you going to do about this? And I think, frankly, and I know you think I'm sugarcoating it, I think she came out stronger.
Yeah, I certainly agree with your point that the Liberals just can't hold a line.
They can't.
And, yeah, as you say, if you're going to put a minister under pressure, you're going to put anyone under pressure, then you need to sustain the pressure.
Yes.
That's right. Like, giving them a bad 5 minutes is not sufficient.
No.
I don't know if David moved to a 7, but maybe he can reflect on that and tell us later on at the end of the show. I'm in New York, and I want to talk about the New York mayoral election that is on at the moment. We're in the home stretch. Early voting opened on the weekend, and election day is next Tuesday. And Zohran Mamdani, for those of you that haven't been paying attention, won the Democratic nomination in the primaries that happened earlier in the year. New York City is a Democratic town. Historically, what happens is the most contested part of the election cycle is the Democratic primary. Those who win the Democratic primary then basically become the mayor, because there's no Republican opposition in the general. So Mamdani won against a packed field, and now is in a contest with Andrew Cuomo, who was a Democrat but is the former governor of the state, and Curtis Silva, who's a Republican identity here in New York. And if anyone's seen any of his content, it's something to behold. So context, heading into the Democratic primaries, Cuomo held a 30-plus point lead over what was a crowded field. And he had all of the New York Democratic establishment supporting him, including high-dollar donors, most of the labor unions, and most Democratic elected officials in the state, and also at a national level. Also, there was Cuomo, and then there was a gap, and then there was everyone else. And in amongst all of that group was a candidate by the name of Zohran Mamdani, who was a member of the Democratic Socialists here in New York. At one stage in the early polling, he was ranked 7th in the polling behind everyone else, including Andrew Cuomo. And it's been interesting just to watch his meteoric rise to now be in a situation where he's days away from becoming the mayor of New York, the biggest city in the country. It's a significant election victory if he was able to pull it off. And one of the things some of the things I've taken away from the campaign, well, in fact, both campaigns since I've been here, is how Mamdani has presented a real and relatable set of ideas for the electorate, including lower grocery prices, rent freezes, free childcare, and free buses, really much grounding his campaign in this sort of affordability and everyday life. And just looking broadly at the way he's run his campaign as opposed to Andrew Cuomo, it's been very consistent in terms of messaging. He's built a reasonably diverse coalition of supporters across the 5 boroughs, but I say reasonably because I don't completely agree with that myself, but that's sort of how it's been reported. Most of his fundraising in the early part of the campaign largely has come from small dollar donors. He's got a strong organic social media presence, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And also he's built a large grassroots volunteer capacity. Over 90,000 volunteers are on his campaign, which is huge numbers for a mayoral campaign anywhere in the country. And it has swamped his opponents. And if you contrast that with Andrew Cuomo's campaign, it looks incredibly dated. Most of his financial resources has gone into paid TV and digital advertising and a lot of old school comms. I was at a bar on Saturday night in Midtown. And it was at
You're at a bar on a Saturday night in New York.
Sorry. Actually, no, it was Sunday night.
You knocked me down with a feather.
It was Sunday night. There you go. I probably was at a bar on Saturday night as well. But I was at a sports bar and I was just looking on the TV. It was all New York TV. At 11:30 at night, I saw on the ad breaks in between the sort of late night sports coverage, like 3 Cuomo ads in each block, and not one Mamdani ad. And it's only now in this late stage that with all of the money that Cuomo has raised, he's now pivoting to some kind of field strategy. There's a super PAC called Fix the City, which is claiming that they've knocked on $350,000 and have spent about $4 million in a weekend push to pay for paid canvases. So it's an interesting juxtaposition to sort of see this campaign of Mamdani's that's come from nowhere to now be in a position to win the election. Now, even before we started recording, I was watching the news tonight, and so early voting results have started to come out, and they're actually interestingly patchy, and you can make an argument from both camps about that they're doing quite well because we're seeing a lot of voters that are turning out to vote in early voting that are older. And the majority of folks that did vote for Mamdani are younger. So the Cuomo campaign are feeling bullish about that. And also higher numbers turning out in the Upper East Side and Upper West Side, which is a more established families community. But also there's a thing called the Communist Corridor that runs through Brooklyn up into Queens and then into the Bronx where Mamdani has done very well amongst young voters and there's high turnouts there as well. So I don't know what's going on. But anyway, it's just been an interesting campaign to watch. And this is obviously broadly a campaign podcast. So I was interested in getting the thoughts of both of you. But David, you're shaking your head and about to throw up. So I'm interested in to see what you make of some of the overall analysis I've given you on this campaign.
I think he's very keen to back Mamdani. I think he's going to give him a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very keen to highlight that your analysis is deeply, deeply flawed. And let's start at the top of the. Let's stop at the top of the analysis.
Coming from Northcote.
from the People's Republic of Northcote.
Literally sitting here in New York right now.
No,
You're in
indeed.
Northcote.
So I bring.
But go ahead, David. You tell me.
I'll bring a sense of perspective and analysis to you. You're obviously too close to it now. You're too emotionally enmeshed in it now.
Hey, I went to Boston for a week. I got distance.
But this is why you bring me on the show, to try and give you some distance and some analysis. So the most fundamental thing about this contest, more than any other factor, is that Cuomo is a deeply compromised political figure. This is a discredited politician trying to rise from the ashes of his own catastrophic career. Let's remember, this is a guy who's got 3 counts against him, and they're all well known by New Yorkers. The first is that there have been a number of corruption scandals where he's been adjacent to the characters who've gone down for serious malfeasance in New York, including former campaign directors, former chiefs of staff. Now, he hasn't been implicated in any of those, but the circle around him has been, and that has done him no good. The second thing that he carries is the deep scars of sexual harassment allegations, where a total of 11 women came out with a series of allegations about his behaviour. That was at the time of Me Too, so he was under an immediate and intensive focus. He handled that terribly. The allegations were appalling, and ultimately he resigned in disgrace.
Is this a long read Mamdani ad? Is that what you're giving us?
Right. So no, we're talking, and then no, it's not, but it well could be. And then this is a guy who commanded New York City during the COVID crisis and bears a lot of scar tissue from that. And, with 2020 hindsight, a lot of the decisions he made during that crisis have not held up well for lots of voters. So the fact that he put himself on the ballot paper was his first mistake. This guy should not have been a candidate. And what it meant was
that your campaign has failed at the first hurdle. You shouldn't be on the ballot.
It's failed at the first hurdle, which is get another candidate. This guy had too much scar tissue, too much baggage, and was too well known by New Yorkers for all of the wrong reasons. But he crawls into the race and he's taken down by a nobody. And he's taken down by a nobody because pre-selectors wanted anybody but Cuomo. And with the sorts of baggage that I've described, it's easy to imagine why progressive voters, even young Democrat voters in particular, would recoil at the idea of pre-selecting him again. That is the secret to Mamdani's success, who he was running against, and that then underpins the whole campaign. Because, of course, after losing the primary, Cuomo goes on to abandon the Democrats and run as an independent, hoping that he can galvanise all of those conservative elements and communities across New York who are appalled at Mamdani's candidacy. Maybe he can do it. I suspect he won't. Maybe he can do it. The other thing to bear in mind when talking about New York City is we're talking about a contest inside the safest of Democrat seats. We're talking about a city where more than 75% of people vote Democrat. So this is not going to tell us anything about America. It's going to tell us about what's going on in blue cities. And the most important thing that's going on in blue cities, if you've got an eye to the national contest of the United States, is that they're making all the wrong decisions. And so the only people more enthusiastic about Mamdani winning than Mamdani are the Republicans. They will want to make him the face of the Democratic Party for the next few years, and they'll want all of his lunatic schemes and all of his appalling foreign policy rhetoric to fill the pages of the United States so that they, the Republicans, can stand in contrast to it. The best thing in the world for the Democratic Party will be if that discredited figure Cuomo limps across the line. I don't know if he will. But if Trump goes to New York City and votes, I tell you who he's voting for. He's voting he's voting for the person who will be a lightning rod for the next years.
I think the only thing that David and I can absolutely agree on out of that conversation is that the outcome of the mayoral election in New York will not determine the presidential outcome. I don't think that Trump is seeing him as the picture that he'll be able to campaign against. I think the Democrats are giving them enough options on that front that this is not the be-all and end-all. I do not agree with David that Mamdani had no qualities aside from the fact that he wasn't Cuomo. He is quite patently a good communicator. He has ideas, whether you agree with them or not, they are easily communicated. They are ideas that take root and people can get around them. I actually don't think there's any argument about that. He has, I think, captured an imagination beyond his delivery. And I think that is dangerous for Democrats and has always been dangerous for Democrats. I think I'm obviously a big supporter of President Obama, but I think that in the early years he was a little hamstrung by the hope message, which kind of made him he got the Nobel Peace Prize before he'd even taken office from memory. This expectation and hope that we have that this person is going to be the great future of the progressive movement is overblown, and I think in the long run can damage the actual to some extent, the Democrats don't need a messiah. They need to get the basics right. And I think this constant looking for one is actually a damaging approach to thinking of their way of dealing with Trump. So I don't agree with everything David said about Mamdani. I think you're a little hard on him, but I also don't think that he matters in the same way that AOC had this sort of buzz around her when she similarly won a pre-selection, a primary in a seat that is blue as blue, that everyone was shocked by. She is a good communicator. You may not agree with everything she says, but she has not fundamentally changed, even though she's gone into the national system. She's not fundamentally changed how politics works in America. And that was the kind of rhetoric that was used about her.
She has. I don't agree with you about that. She's formed this coalition with Bernie Sanders. They've done a national roadshow together. Bernie's
you think she's fundamentally changed the way the politics operates in America?
She has definitely helped move the Democratic Party into a more left-wing position nationally in the United States. She has.
I think there is no...
And she's sort of getting the baton passed to her by Bernie Sanders as they do this national roadshow together.
I didn't think that I would be in this position.
That is a significant element inside the Democratic Party.
I think the AOC has won more votes for the Democrats than lost them.
Okay, well then I look forward to seeing the results of the next election. I want you to be right. It's just that you're not.
No, I think AOC is actually far more moderate than Mamdani, but anyway.
We're now talking about whether Trotsky was a more reasonable figure around the Politburo table than Stalin, aren't we? We're kind of
Democrats need
drawing
good communicators.
Fine distinctions here between.
Let's get some.
Can I, if you give me a moment here, David, I want to rebut to your rebuttal, and there are some points you've made in there that I actually do agree with. Look, there is definitely an ABC factor. Anyone but Cuomo, that was definitely happening inside the Democratic Party when Cuomo first put his hand up to run for mayor. You said he crawled into the race. He most certainly did not crawl into the race, because the minute he put up his hand, and for quite some time, he was winning in the polls substantially. And there was so much money funneling into his campaign. Into Cuomo's campaign. Yeah. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you can have all the money in the world. Yes, he was a flawed candidate. There's no doubt about that. You can have all the money in the world, but there was a period of time there where voters were prepared to, certainly when they were getting surveyed, that they were going to vote for Cuomo. They were saying, I'm going to vote for Cuomo.
Nothing kills a bad product like good advertising. And the fact that his message is fix the city, this leads everyone to say, well, hey, you've had a go at it and all you did was break it.
But to the second point you made, there was 7 or 8 other people running in this race that were all nobodies. And I just think it's interesting that Mamdani was the one that managed to become the viable alternate candidate. And he did it in a way that I think what I would draw from it was there are elements of his campaign that, from just a campaigner's perspective, not from whether you agree with his politics or not,
than the others.
Then I think there's value in looking.
Better organised.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredibly organised. His material is schmick. He's constantly on message. He's had a lot of negativity thrown at him, and he's done reasonably well to try and handle that, but then stay on message. So it's not like he's had an easy walk in the park in both the primaries and in the general. So I just think there's some interesting things to take away from that. Another thing that I would point out, and when I said before he's built a diverse coalition, I would counter-argue that and say that the coalition he's built is essentially young people, so 18 to 35s, right across the city, and the rich. It's not diverse when it comes to people of colour. There are a lot of folks that, particularly if you look in the voter turnout in places like the Bronx, which is overtly black and brown, that he didn't do very well there. And he's struggling in that. And Bernie Sanders had the same problem at a national level in the Democratic primaries, could not win black and brown votes. And Mamdani's having the same problem. And I think that's part of the way that Cuomo is trying to get back in the game, is to re-engage with that base. But his campaign's shit house, so it's probably too little too late. But there's also another thing that's been interesting to come out of some of the research, is that there's this Trump Mamdani voter. So folks that are Democrat registered that voted for Donald Trump in the general last year and now switched to Mamdani.
They're just disruptors. They're just voting for people who tear down the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And absolutely. And that's what's come out of all the meetings we had last week. And some people refer to it as economic popularism. Yeah, we can maybe label it that, but putting a Labor Party lens through it, and particularly from a Victorian Labor Party lens, it's just coming up with ideas that appeal to voters in that moment. Donald Trump talked about no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. What's one of the biggest industries in the United States, and what's one of the biggest industries in this city? Service workers. Yeah. And there are people, and what color are they? They are black and brown. And that's why we saw swings to Donald Trump in this particular city. And what's Mamdani talking about? He's talking about things that are going to address the cost of living. And so I don't think you can call them economically popular. I would just call them ideas that actually are going to resonate with voters, which is no different to, and Jessie's nodding, it's no different to what Daniel Andrews did for 8 years, is come up with ideas that people will say, yeah, that makes sense to my lives, and I'll probably vote for you. So I guess what
That's
I'm just
true,
but
I bemoan the fact that sort of in the Jurassic period when I learnt politics, there was another element as well, and that is that the ideas had to be practical and affordable rather than just pie in the sky. And, the broken exchequer of New York City is just going to be broken a little bit further by trying to implement these harebrained ideas. But they're virtue signalling at a moment. They're tapping into a mood.
Virtue signalling is different to giving cost of living relief. And look, frankly, I'm not that au fait with Mandela's Mamdani's policies.
Like, I'm not. Or afforded, it's virtue signalling.
The other thing I will point out, and this is another theory,
maybe he's going to tax the rich, David. I don't know.
He's the mayor of New York. He's not the president of the United States.
I don't know. Do they have taxation capacity? Probably not.
I'm sure they do.
They do, but they have to get it through the governor's office up in Albany, and that's the story is that Hochul is going to block all of that. But he's also been compromising as well. And to the point you said before, Jessie, about how a lot of people had high aspirations for Obama, and then in the presidency didn't deliver the panacea, I guess. He's going to have the same. Mamdani, if he's elected, is going to have the same problem because his base, particularly the young people, think that he is going to turn the water into wine. And when he gets in there and tries to start to run this budget that's already completely a shambles, he's going to find it difficult, and people will be let down by it. He's either going to have to completely
He'll just convert all of that socialist action fury into blaming another tier of government and another political figure.
Yeah, so he'll take a path that every politician before him has.
Such cynicism.
I don't know. I generally think that American politics is certainly the progressive side is very different to the culture and traditions of the Labor Party, which make us strong. And part of that is we don't always look to the individual to be the answer to everything. And to go back to my previous point, I do think the Democrats need to do more about actually building a foundation of strong support and key messages that go beyond just a couple of pretty faces that can execute a communication strategy.
Thank you.
To prove that point, the fact that Cuomo ratted, that he's running against the endorsed candidate after having lost the pre-selection
means we
himself.
hate him because we hate rats.
Right, exactly right.
That's a Labor Party.
Over then, people.
Yeah, but
That's a Labor Party value. That's not a Democratic value. That's not a Democratic Party value.
Like, part of the reason I am so fundamentally
Parties choose their politicians in Australia, and politicians choose their parties in the United States.
He's not a stick and thick fucking Democrat. Like, the guy doesn't run as a Democrat in pre-select. Like, I find
he's
that
independent.
I find it like, is this your team or not? And if I can't tell that you're with these guys, how do I know you're with me? But that's certainly that is our way of thinking about these things.
Quite
Just
right.
Final point on the
Stephen,
New
you
York
wanted
stuff.
to talk about my pretty face, and I cut you off.
Yeah,
earlier.
you mentioned hotness before. There's a theory out there called hot privilege, and that one of the reasons why candidates like Mamdani are winning is because he holds hot privilege. The same for AOC. They're good-looking people, and so people just want to vote for them because they're good-looking.
Yeah, look,
I think that as the only person on this call that actually has the authority to speak on this issue, it's what you do with your platform. It's what you do with your platform. So just because people are listening to them because they're hot, like, what do they say? It's whether you use your privilege for good.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Well, it worked for Angus Taylor for 3 years. All right, let's do a communication breakdown with Jessie McCrone. Over to you, Jessie. What is your communication breakdown for this month?
Right. So as you both know, or as you know, Stephen, like particularly, this is not a podcast where we like taking pot shots at fellow travellers and that sort of thing. So I do not want this to be perceived as that because
some of us put them in bubble wrap and make sure no criticism will reach them.
I, though, think that it is incumbent upon us, given how much we talk about campaigns and communications, to discuss the ideas put forward in the Australian this week, about digital advertising.
Idea in the Australian? Holy gods, I missed that.
Well, to be fair, the Australian didn't originate it; the commentator did. So there was an article about whether Jacinta Allen should be advertising on Facebook. Essentially, apparently, newsletters to your constituents paid for by your electorate budget, okay. Advertising where they actually are, not okay. That seems to be the general take. I would
Facebook's
just
probably a lot cheaper too.
Indeed. I would just draw people's attention to some of the commentary. And look, frankly, I don't know what questions were put to Cos Samaras when answering this. Like, he may have been asked, is social media the future of all communications with the community? And obviously the answer is no. However, I think some of the commentary there, I want to take issue with the idea that advertising on social media is just a waste of money for political campaigns. I think has demonstrably been disproven at the federal campaign. I think that the digital campaign that the federal Labor Party campaign ran was phenomenal. Reid talked about it at length on this podcast. So just for those listening at home, Redbridge pollster and former Labor strategist Cos Samaras told the Australian voters were no longer engaging with political content on social media. This is my question about whether the question was more about organics, but and there was a little to be gained from spending money, whether from taxpayers or political parties, advertising there. Whether it's blue or red, I just go, oh God, that's a waste of money, Mr. Samaras said. This is where the fish are. Like, your whole point in a campaign or in a communications attempt is essentially, in the first instance, to make sure your message is, like, one, get a good message, make sure it's resonant, like make sure that you understand who you're talking to and what moves them, but also get it in front of them. Now, I'm not saying that we should only be advertising on digital platforms. I'm not saying – I certainly don't think digital campaigns are the only way forward, but I think the idea that no one is wanting to see political ads on their Instagram feed means you shouldn't advertise there is a bit of a flawed argument. And I hope he's been taken out of context, because I would just say to campaigners across the country, whether it's door knocking, whether it's radio ads, whether it's Facebook ads. Your message has to be good, but where people are is where you want your message to be.
And everywhere.
Yeah, and everywhere. Pull all the levers.
Yeah, if you've got the money or if you've got the resources, then absolutely, you want to be everywhere. Not to undermine your point there, Jessie.
But you will.
No. But one of the interesting things I took away from back to the Mamdani campaign for a moment, he hardly spent any money on paid advertising because they didn't have the money, whereas Cuomo did. And if you can track the audience numbers comparing Cuomo's campaign with Mamdani's, all of Mamdani's was all organic, and it dwarfed Cuomo, which is fascinating. And so Mamdani's obviously creating good content that's then getting shared by influencers and people with their own audiences as well. Yeah, so I'm probably going to more of an insular debate there versus the paid versus the organic, right? And there was more authenticity and there was story in the Mamdani stuff, and it was all organic and it was shareable because people liked it. Versus Cuomo that was doing the traditional paid, just doing a 10-second spot here, and it was costing him money, but it wasn't actually reaching the kind of numbers that the organic stuff was. Now, we're not always going to get that, right?
No,
so you just got to do what you got to do.
We're also talking about apples and oranges. Like, we are talking about a campaign where you're trying to turn people out and engage them on that. Like, in Australia, we're talking about a compulsory voting system where they're going to have to go to the polling booth. And I find it doesn't actually explain where else you should be putting your message, but frankly, newspapers are not the way forward of political advertising. Mail has had declining impact. People are glued to their phones. Like, people are doing 6 and 7 hours of screen time every day, and the idea that you completely avoid that space, I think, is folly.
David, anything on that one, or do you want to go straight to your filibuster?
Just ears open and learning all the time.
All right. Thank you, Jessie. David, over to you with your Feeney filibuster for the month.
My Feeney filibuster for the month, thanks to Paul Sakai at The Age, is a story concerning a Greens party email that fine and upstanding political party sent out on October the 7th, which you might remember is a date of some significance. It was the anniversary of the Hamas pogrom in Israel. So that was the kind of anniversary that the Greens mark on their calendar. They sent out an email, and in that email they called on the recipient to donate today to help end the occupation and stand with Palestine. And this mail out was sent out with sort of a caption, with a number of boxes that the recipient could choose to donate $25, $50, so on and so forth. As it turns out, this money was not going anywhere near Palestine or the pro-Palestinian cause, as it was going directly into the Greens party coffers. And so this email got called out for its appalling sense of timing, but also this misleading and deceptive conduct of the email itself, that a donation did nothing to stand with Palestine. It did something to stand with Green aspirants for public office. So I thought that was a terrific illustration now of where the Greens are at in their continuing campaign for accountability and transparency, which is do as I say, don't do as I do.
Shame.
It's disgusting. And can I just add to this? Like, I do remember, I'm going to get the details wrong, I do remember there was a fundraising email that was sent out by a Labor campaign, perhaps during the Queensland floods in 2009, that directed people to donate to the Queensland floods, not to the Labor Party. And from memory, all hell broke loose that a political party would be using this event to talk to members at all. And the space between that and this, and the fact that they kind of wouldn't apologise for it either. There was no, sorry, that was an error. It was kind of like, oh, this is New South Wales branch, like I don't control the emails. But it's disgusting.
A spokesperson for Larissa Walters said donations are a matter for the party.
Yeah, it was just like, very distasteful.
Glass jaw. Let's go to our categories for the week. Does anyone have a nomination for Tory with a typewriter?
I believe you do.
I was going to nominate Andrew Clennell because I just thought that it was more like a Tory with a microphone in the White House Oval Office, but it was just an unbelievable performance. Unbelievable. And I've already talked about it, but I'm just going to nominate Andrew. There you go, mate. Congratulations. You've made it.
You might remember he was the journalist, and I use that term advisedly, who made it his raison d'etre to follow Anthony Albanese around for an entire election campaign, asking him what the price of eggs were and what the unemployment rate was today, and made himself a bit of a hero in Conservative circles for these gotcha questions of the Labor leader. It's good to see that since then he's really reined it in, hasn't he? He's now looking to do more constructive and thoughtful work as a journalist.
My Mel Meninga, so we've got a Mel Meninga in over my head award. I've actually I watched the New York debate last week, and for a political election in which I think like close to $150 million is going to be spent. The candidates on the stage, the three main candidates, Mamdani, Cuomo and Silva, it reminded me of a campaign leadership debate I went to in far north Queensland in Cairns in the 2010 state election, where there was some of the most bonkers candidates I've ever seen in my entire life. And I really questioned the future of Australian democracy in that moment, while I was once again questioning the future of democracy in the state of New York. Andrew Cuomo's performance was appalling, but Curtis Silva was hysterical. And he was the guy in the middle that wasn't getting any questions, but they had to have him there because he's the other candidate. And the journalists are asking the questions and were just completely ignoring him. And as they were ignoring him, he was losing it. And one of the questions was, how do you normally – he's like a New York identity that's been around for decades.
The Red Berets, isn't it?
The Red Beret guy, yeah. And one of the questions towards the end was like, what's your favourite mode of transport around New York? Do you ride? And it was sort of set up to be like, I ride my bike because I'm environmentally friendly or whatever. And Silva's answer was, well, it's certainly not going to get a cab because last time I got a cab, I got shot in the chest by the Gambino family in 1973 or something like that. It was like all of the answers the whole night were loose. Absolutely.
I don't think he's in over his head. I think he's exactly where he needs to be.
Yeah.
Last time I saw he was polling at 14%, and there you go.
Yeah. Possibly unanswerable questions. We actually got one from Kazza Boots that I just want to sort of get your thoughts on this one, Jessie, because she asked, do journalists have a chat about what questions they're going to ask before a media announcement? I enjoy seeing the different perspectives on each channel, ABC, SBS, 7, 9, 10, but they all seem to be asking the same questions these days. Is this collusion or just the inability to think independently? We used to get lots of different things from the journalists. What's going on there, Jessie?
Several different takes on this one. So here's a great question. There is, if you're looking at press conferences as a way to increase transparency and hold people to account, arguably it is better if the press gallery work together. It is too easy for a leader that gets one question from someone to sort of deal with it and not get the follow-up and try and change subject by going to a different journalist. So if you actually want that idea that you're going to dig into an issue, arguably what you want is the press gallery to move together. There are obviously downsides to that. One, which is generally the press gallery aren't the best deciders of what the public actually want to know about and what they want people to be held accountable for. I think we saw a fair bit of that in the pandemic press conferences where the questions the journalists were asking felt out of step with what the community actually wanted to know. There has been a move away from that working collectively. Some journalists have privately confided to me that they find it a little bit more challenging to sort of hold people to account when people are throwing 15 different topics at the person during a press conference. I will be very honest that at some points when journalists were getting a bit on a roll in a previous life, We may have thrown some interesting information or exclusive to a journalist via text during the press conference to change the conversation in the press conference and take them away from that topic. It's the game. You got to play it. It worked. And there's a lot of obviously dynamics playing within a press gallery about ego and who's following the story, and if Blah's following the story, I'm following a different story. So there's just a lot of dynamics, because you've got to remember the press gallery is for both state and federal level. Like these guys live and breathe the same space, and they know each other extraordinarily well. And there's a lot of other power stuff happening in their world as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is a dynamic. A good press sec is very aware of the dynamic and very aware of how to make that dynamic work best for the leader. Arguably, if you want better answers, you want a press gallery that is impervious to the meddlings of press secs.
My only other
fantasy press gallery would need to be impervious to their own political activism as well.
Indeed.
I mean, how do you collaborate with journalists like Clennell or Rachel Baxendale, who are just utter activists for the coalition? How do they in turn collaborate with the Guardian or others that are just activists for the Greens and left-wing causes? So these people are ideological adversaries in the same way that the political actors are.
Yeah, I'm not I take your point that certainly some of them are. I don't think they are in the main ideological for a worldview in the way I would view it. They're ideological for their own worldview. Does that make sense? That their own way of seeing things is the way forward, they're not necessarily left or right. Anyway, I don't know that bears going. There's probably a whole other podcast in that.
My other probably unanswerable question I did have at one moment during the during the Albanese Trump press conference was, does President Trump actually know who the ambassador of Australia is? But I'm not 100% certain if that's the case. Mailbag questions. We had 2 for our October mailbag, but I held them over because they are for you, David. The first one is from Chari.
Give the people what they want. David Feeney.
Chari's one of our Patreon subscribers. He or she says that they were watching The Killing Season, which is a documentary on the Rudd-Gillard government, and David Feeney's name kept coming up, portraying him as an effective backroom operator. And Charizard says, I'm an aspiring master of the dark arts myself, with heroes like Graham Richardson and Mark Arbib. Any tips on becoming a good power broker, David?
Is this person for serious?
Yeah, I don't know if he's taking the piss or not, or she's taking the piss or not.
The first advice I would offer is that in watching The Killing Season, he or she will have observed that I didn't appear in the show and was not interviewed for it. And
proper
I think
backroom dealer behaviour. That's what that is.
Yeah, I think that whereas some of my colleagues actually did reenactments for the show and were pilloried by the rest of us for doing so. Not that it seems to have affected their careers in any detrimental way. There's a lot of rubbish that is written about influential people inside the Labor Party because the media like to paint a picture of warlord and warlordism, and leaving people with the mental image that there are these mindless tribes shepherded by these powerful, brutish figures, and if you and some people in the Labor Party who are unsuccessful imagine that to be the world they're in, and that's not the world they're in. Effective backroom operators have one powerful quality, irrespective of their politics or their geography. They all possess it, and that's the power of persuasion, because the measure of someone's effectiveness is how persuasive are they, and whether it be talking ideologically, talking about campaigns, talking about the practical politics of the moment, or ideally blending them all. The task is to convince others who are all independent actors, capable of making their own decisions and assessing their own interests, convincing enough of them about something so that the course of action you've set out has a chance of success. So my advice would be work on being persuasive. Because Graham Richardson, Robert Ray, all of these power brokers that are in the pantheon of heroes, all were people of enormous intelligence and charm who were persuasive.
Can I just add from an outsider's perspective on what I
from
consider
your own power broking perspective? Yes.
In a good power broker, usually they are also very conscious of the collective goal. A good power broker, and like I put Don Farrell in that category, very conscious that in the end the goal is achieving government and making change. So
yes, that's right.
I think
the
that
needs
a
of
good
the many
power broker,
outweigh the needs of the few.
Yeah, and
right.
if it's done properly and you are persuasive, a lot of your job, from what I have seen, is explaining to people why they can't do things that are for their own benefit, but not for the benefit of the many. Which is actually the complicated part. You're not just running around telling people, I'm going to persuade you. You're going to be a minister.
Yes, that's right.
You're persuading them why not yet. Why you are not yet going to be a minister.
Yes.
David, any particular stories where you had to sit someone down and tell them that they're not going to be a minister you want to share with us?
No, but they're all, some of them didn't go very well. No.
I know of one, but I really want to do it, but maybe I'll wait.
Is this a me story or a somebody else story?
No, you weren't in it.
Well, I think that it's, we all want to hear
I
it.
won't say who the person who was wanting to be a member of parliament.
Oh, I've heard this story.
But they were treated like a fool by key Victorian right power brokers because they were all in the same room with that particular person, and they all got together to tell this person, unfortunately, we were going to promise you upper house Western Metro, but we just can't get the numbers internally within the faction for it to happen. And this person then said to these 5 people, but you represent this subgroup and you represent this subgroup and you represent this subgroup and you represent this subgroup, and that all adds up to 65% of our faction. To which they all looked at each other and started taking phone calls and walking away.
Well, that sounds like the kind of meeting that would have occurred in sort of around 2008, 2009, when the Victorian right, through a combination of venal behaviour and incompetence, fell into 1,000 different shards.
Yes. The second question, this one's from Paul Keating's biggest fan, who's sent in previous questions as well. Paul Keating's biggest fan, thank you for supporting the show.
I didn't know you could write in your own questions, Stephen.
Yeah, I know. I did say that last time. I said, how could you be? I am. Bob Carr and Paul Keating argue that AUKUS is a way for the US to compel Australia to join a hypothetical war with China and make us pay for it. When we simply could sit it out, why would Australia need to preemptively strike a distant country, 3 submarines, which will realistically never be delivered on time, all of if at all, could not achieve this. In reality, they would only be used alongside US military operations. It makes more sense to invest in defensive submarines, which are far cheaper, for example, the French ones. So what is the counter-argument for AUKUS, David?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me to defend AUKUS. I thought that question, that's just straight down Jessie's wheelhouse. That's what that is. No? Okay.
Well, I think it's interesting, I think, at the broader political level that the federal Labor government really is now all in on AUKUS and has been, of course, now for some years since AUKUS was first announced. But the task of explaining it and defending it is going to continue to be a task of importance, and it's not going to get easier, I think. And Bob Carr and Paul Keating have been singled out as critics of it, but there are more and more of them, and they do get airplay. Malcolm Turnbull is one that springs to mind. He is quite eloquent on this subject as well. And so the task of defending AUKUS is a job of significance because, as a giant intergenerational multi-government project, it's going to need a lot of public support, a social license to do the things it wants to do. A couple of issues with the phraseology in the question. No one's imagining that an American conflict with China would be paid for by Australia. The good news is we don't have the wherewithal or the levels of stupidity required to undertake such a thing. I think the aspiration would be that we are trying to form a coalition that is able to deter aggressive behaviour, and the scale and scope of the Chinese rearmament is obviously changing people's persuasions and calculations. And the fact that the sort of Chinese reasoning behind that rearmament is opaque. They don't produce white papers in the same way that Australia does, where we set out what we're doing and why, which is not simply to explain it to our own polity, but also surrounding polities can see, well, Australia is acquiring X military capability, but here's the why, to make sure that essentially there is a level of understanding and confidence about our intentions. We don't get that sort of relief as we watch China's rearmament. And the debate about what kind of submarine, well, I mean, I would just simply make the point that a nuclear submarine is kind of the Rolls-Royce option for Australia because of its range and endurance. I remember, many years ago when I was in office reading an article where a German newspaper heralded the accomplishment of some German submariners who'd successfully conducted a transit from Germany to Cyprus, heralding this remarkable undersea odyssey of their submarine. And I remember our submariners just scoffing and saying, that's just a regular Sydney to Perth transit for our guys. The range that we need our submarines to operate at, and the endurance so that when they reach a place they can stay there rather than having to immediately turn around and come back for resupply, means that we have particular capability requirements which are challenging. And the nuclear submarine, I guess, because of its range and endurance, is the easiest solution to those challenges. Now, the French submarine, I think, arguably was a solution as well, because it was going to be the largest conventional sub ever built and it had certain characteristics. But nonetheless, we have these big capability requirements which aren't easy to solve. So I think that's the kind of answer I'd leave your Patreon with.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And thank you, Jessie. Unless you got it. Jessie, do you want to add anything on in terms of the AUKUS debate?
I gave that answer a 6 out of 10.
Can I move you to a 7?
No.
If I keep talking?
Nice throwback. That's why people pay for this show.
Are we?
Yep.
Oh, no, we're not paid. You're paid. Okay, right.
I'm paid. I don't know what your problem is.
Our Patreon.
Stephen told me not to discuss salary with you.
Unionists are always the best at working out how to divide and conquer.
That's right. My old boss at the Transport Workers Union used to say, we're here to defend democracy, not practice it.
And on that note, David Feeney, thank you so much for your time this week. It's been wonderful to see you again and to tell me exactly what's going on in New York from the lofty heights of Northcote.
And I hope from this sort of distant vantage point where we're able to think about things objectively and analytically, you've learned something too, Stephen, and can move out from your emotional enmeshment in the scene of the day and actually bring some judgment to your surroundings.
And Jessie McCrone, thank you so much for your contribution in defending our wonderful ministers that are doing a great job in our national parliament.
I don't think they needed defending. I'd call that a just cold analysis of the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you both, and that we didn't agree today, but I think in the end, democracy was the winner.
Well, because this is not the kind of show that's going to retreat into just twee lines and, well-run lines like that, is it? We're going to always be, thought leaders.
Indeed. And thanks to all of our Patreon subscribers and supporters of the show that sent through a couple of questions today. Really appreciate that. be well, and I'll be talking to you all next week. I don't know what our next show is, so I was going to say don't forget to listen. But listen to the Marshall Gantz episode.
Yeah, do.
That was a lovely conversation with Marshall up in Cambridge. He is an international treasure of the community organising community, and so I really encourage you to go back and listen to Marshall's episode. Lots of deep and rich learnings from our conversation with Marshall. So do that. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.